You were taught to chase answers, taught that knowledge meant safety, that certainty was a virtue. And so you became a collector of facts, of plans, of guarantees. You believed that if you just knew enough, planned enough, controlled enough, life would finally stop hurting. It would make sense. It would be manageable. But the more you knew, the louder your mind became. The more you tried to grasp life, the more it slipped through your fingers. You live inside a constant hum, a buzz of needing to know. Will this work out? Will they stay? Will I be okay? Questions, endless questions, all demanding answers that never come. Or if they do, they unravel within days. Certainty, it seems, is a mirage that disappears the closer you get to it. Michel de Montaigne once wrote, "Nothing is so firmly believed as that which we least know." The irony of being human is this: we worship certainty, and yet we're built for change, for ambiguity, for questions that don't close, but open. You were not born to know. You were born to discover. But discovery requires something terrifying. It requires not knowing. And so begins the noise, the mental storm that forms when we resist the nature of life, when we demand structure from something that was never meant to be structured, when we cling to solid answers in a world made of water. Look closely at your inner world. How much of your stress comes from not having answers? How much of your panic comes from the spaces in between, the waiting, the uncertainty, the gaps? We are taught to fear those gaps, but maybe that fear is the real prison. Because the truth is, what you fear about uncertainty isn't danger, it's vulnerability. It's the surrender of your ego, the collapse of your imagined control, the thing in you that wants to be untouchable, unshaken, unafraid. That part believes certainty will protect it. But it never does, because certainty isn't armor, it's illusion. And illusions demand enormous psychic energy to maintain. When you begin to sense this, to truly feel how much of your life is spent defending illusions, a quiet sadness sets in, a grief. You realize that your entire identity has been built on the avoidance of doubt, of mystery, of life as it truly is. You've confused knowledge with wisdom. And now your mind is exhausted. You can't think your way out of this. You can only begin to feel your way in. Uncertainty isn't the enemy. It's the natural atmosphere of growth. It's the soil in which meaning sprouts, but only if you stop trying to dominate it. You're like someone shouting over a river, demanding it explain where it's going. But rivers don't respond to commands. They only flow. And the noise in your head, that spinning, planning, grasping noise, is the sound of you trying to resist the flow. You can't embrace life while also trying to control it. You can't feel joy while also policing every outcome. You can't discover anything if you're unwilling to be surprised. You were taught to fear surprise, but surprise is the soul's signal that something real is happening, that life is still bigger than your plans, that you're still alive. So what if the noise in your head, the overthinking, the anxious spirals, the need for answers, isn't proof that something's wrong, but proof that you've been at war with uncertainty for too long, and it's time to lay down your arms. There's no perfect strategy for life. There's no final answer that removes all doubt. There's only awareness and movement, and the courage to stop asking, "What if this goes wrong?" and instead whisper to yourself, What if I just lived? Lived without guarantees, lived without knowing, lived without making certainty a prerequisite for peace. Because here's the truth Montaigne understood. The more you demand certainty, the less peace you will have. But the more you accept mystery, the quieter your mind becomes. The noise fades, not because you found all the answers, but because you stopped needing them. And that's when life begins to soften, to breathe, to move. Because now, you're finally listening. You've always mistaken doubt for weakness. They trained you to. They told you that the strong never waver, that conviction is clarity, that certainty is character, and that if you begin to question, even for a second, you will be seen as small, as inconsistent, as broken. But what if that was the real lie? What if doubt is not the absence of wisdom, but the very beginning of it? What if the most profound truths don't come from answers, but from the willingness to hold a question and not rush to kill it? Let's pause here. Because something in you already knows this. Somewhere in the silence you felt it, a flicker. That strange sense that your greatest insights didn't arrive when you were certain. They arrived when you fell apart, when you let go of what you thought you knew and began to listen. Not to others, not to books, not even to your own mind, but to something deeper, older, quieter. To that voice beneath the ego, the voice that doesn't shout, but hums, the voice that speaks not in facts, but in feeling, the voice of the self. But the world doesn't teach you to trust that voice. It teaches you to fear it. Because that voice, the one born from your own inner silence, can't be manipulated. It can't be sold to. It can't be rushed, reasoned with, or reformatted. It's wild. It's inconvenient. It interrupts your plans. It destroys your certainty. It asks questions like, why are you doing this? Who told you this was the right path? What if success isn't what you think it is? What if everything you're chasing isn't even yours? And these questions, they don't just shake your beliefs, they burn them. Not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. Because anything real, anything that truly belongs to you, will survive the fire of doubt. Everything else was borrowed. Look closely at your own story. How many of your convictions were inherited, not chosen? How many of your values were adopted, not discovered? How many of your beliefs were installed before you ever had a chance to question them? They gave you a map before you were even old enough to realize you were lost. And they told you, follow this. Don't question it. Certainty will save you. But it didn't save you, did it? It just made you obedient, predictable, confused, but afraid to admit it. So you performed confidence. You memorized answers. You regurgitated ideas you didn't fully understand just to fit in, just to look sure, just to silence the tremble in your own chest that kept whispering, I don't think this is who I am. That whisper, that was the beginning of doubt. And that was the beginning of your liberation. Because here's the truth. Doubt is sacred. Doubt is not weakness. It is resistance to being told who you are. Doubt is the soul refusing to be molded by false stories. Doubt is what happens when your spirit stretches its arms and refuses to live in someone else's version of truth. But doubt is uncomfortable. It pulls the floor out from under you. It doesn't replace old beliefs with new ones right away. It just clears the space
and leaves you staring into emptiness. And that emptiness, it terrifies the ego. Because the ego wants structure. It wants a script. It wants to know. And doubt is the death of knowing. But it is the birth of being. Because being doesn't require explanation. It just requires presence. And when the ego finally breaks, when the scaffolding of false certainty finally collapses, what's left is you. Not the version of you they taught, not the mask, not the label, not the performance, but the essence. The one who breathes beneath the story, the one who listens without needing to conclude, the one who can say, "I don't know," and not feel ashamed. That version of you is truth. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. But doubt forces you to face it, not in anger, but in silence." And silence is not emptiness, it is space. And space is what the soul needs to speak. So let yourself break. Let the questions shake you. Let the sacred doubt in. Let it burn what no longer fits. Let it collapse the categories. Let it dissolve the fake gods of certainty and make room for awe. Let it be disorienting. Let it be lonely. Let it be quiet. Because something always grows in the aftermath. Something original, not borrowed, not repeated, not taught. Something discovered. Your own inner knowing, not because someone approved of it, but because it refused to die. The world will try to rush you through this. It will say, choose a side, pick a label, be definitive, stop doubting. But don't listen. Your healing depends on your refusal to rush through the gray areas, because it's in the in-between, between what you knew and what you haven't found yet, that your true self starts to emerge. And it doesn't emerge with clarity. It emerges with courage. The courage to sit inside a question and not flinch. You were never supposed to have all the answers. You were supposed to live the questions. You were supposed to doubt so that you could rebuild truth from the inside out. Not as dogma, not as defense, but as discovery. You were supposed to say, "I don't know who I am." And then slowly, painfully, begin to feel your way toward the answer. Not intellectually, but viscerally, spiritually. Not by declaring it, but by becoming it. Moment by moment. Breath by breath. And then one day, you realize you never needed certainty to be whole. You just needed presence. You just needed permission to pause, to listen to the quiet voice inside without drowning it in answers. So if you are doubting everything right now, good. That's not a failure. That's an initiation. The real you is trying to emerge, not as a perfect conclusion, but as a living question. Let yourself be that question, not so you can answer it, but so you can live it, every day, every moment, until the silence inside you feels like home.
You always thought control was your safety, that certainty was your compass. But in your quietest moments, you've noticed something. The tighter you grip, the more everything slips. This is where we begin. In the prison you mistook for protection. You organize your days, you structure your thoughts, you make rules and systems and goals, all to avoid the unthinkable, not knowing. But here's the irony Montaigne knew all too well. The more you try to fix the future, the less alive you become in the present. Control becomes a distraction, a false god promising order while secretly feeding your fear. You start to fear spontaneity. You distrust your own instincts. You confuse predictability with peace. And worst of all, you slowly lose touch with the mystery that makes life worth living. Real life, the kind that breathes, stings, heals, surprises, cannot be controlled. It can only be met. And to meet life, you must be willing to be changed by it. You must be willing to not know what will happen next. This is the deeper truth Montaigne was circling. The desire for control is not power, it is paralysis. What you call being responsible is often just being terrified. What you call being productive is sometimes just a way to drown out the silence that reveals your deeper hunger. The real question isn't, how do I gain more control? The real question is, what part of me is so afraid of surrendering it? That's where the door opens. You were trained to control because it made others feel comfortable, predictable, easy to manage. But your soul was never meant to be managed. It was meant to be expressed, to move like water, to speak like poetry. You don't need a life you can control. You need a life you can trust. And trust, unlike control, begins when you let go. It begins when you stop trying to be the architect of every outcome and start becoming the artist of your own presence. Control is a cage, and it's time to stop mistaking safety for aliveness. The door is already open. You're the one holding the key. If this message is resonating with something buried deep inside you, consider subscribing. This channel is for minds like yours, seekers, thinkers, wanderers who are tired of the noise and hungry for something real. Each week we explore the spaces between philosophy and healing, not to give you answers, but to help you ask better questions. Now, breathe. And let's move to the next threshold. You've spent most of your life chasing clarity, like a child reaching for stars in the sky. Every unanswered question, every undefined feeling, it all pressed on your chest like gravity itself. The mind was trained to seek conclusions, like a machine programmed to eliminate mystery. But you are not a machine. You are a river, and rivers do not demand to know where they'll end up. You were taught to believe that if you didn't know, you'd drown. But in truth, it's the clinging that drowns you. The tighter you hold on to your theories, your labels, your categories of self and others, the more life slips through your fingers like water. You weren't made for walls. You were made for wind. The unknown was never your enemy. It was your origin. The womb you came from was dark, fluid, undefined. And when you arrived in this world, it was your first scream, not your first answer, that defined your aliveness. Somewhere along the way, fear was introduced. Not just fear of death, but fear of ambiguity. The moment a child starts asking why, the world starts shoveling answers. But most of those answers are borrowed, inherited, not felt, not lived. They become armor against the great wave of uncertainty. But armor rusts, and eventually it begins to suffocate. When you stop demanding certainty from life, something strange happens. Silence begins to speak. What once felt like void now feels like potential. What once felt like chaos now feels like space. You stop reacting to every thought like it's a fire alarm. You begin observing them like clouds. You start remembering that not knowing isn't a defect, it's a design. Stillness returns. But this stillness isn't static. It breathes. It doesn't offer conclusions. It offers clarity. There's a difference. Conclusions are dead. Clarity is alive. Clarity allows room for paradox. It says, I don't know, and that's okay. It doesn't demand a label for every feeling, a box for every behavior, a reason for every scar. When you allow yourself to drift in the current of not knowing, your senses come alive again.
You notice how the trees move differently when you're not forcing meaning onto them. You feel time slow down, not because you've mastered a productivity system, but because you've surrendered the need to master time at all. This surrender is not laziness. It's not apathy. It's precision. The precision of choosing presence over panic. The precision of being able to say, "This is hard, but I don't need to escape it with an answer." The most emotionally intelligent people you'll ever meet are the ones who no longer need to explain everything. They feel deeply without dissecting. They trust the process without controlling it. Carl Jung once said, "In all chaos there is a cosmos. In all disorder, a secret order." But to see that order, you have to stand still enough to stop projecting your fears onto the unknown. You have to let the storm be a storm and stop pretending it owes you a forecast. Uncertainty isn't just part of life, it is life. Every meaningful decision, every real relationship, every act of creation lives in the space of not knowing. Love isn't love if it's guaranteed. Growth isn't growth if it's scripted. Healing isn't healing if it follows a perfect timeline. There's a kind of wisdom that only shows up when you stop trying to be wise. When you stop reading quotes and start noticing your breath. When you stop chasing insight and start sitting with your shadows. When you stop asking, "What's next?" and start asking, "What's here?" And what's here, right now, is enough. You don't need to figure it all out. You only need to listen, to notice, to allow. You only need to trust that life knows what it's doing, even when you don't. Because maybe peace doesn't come from solving the puzzle. Maybe it comes from realizing there was never a puzzle to begin with. And in that realization, you finally exhale.
You sit alone, but it doesn't feel lonely. The room isn't quiet, but it's calm. There's still 1,000 things unresolved in your life, bills unpaid, people unanswered, memories unfinished. Yet none of them are screaming anymore. They're just there, like clouds passing through an open sky. For the first time, you're not demanding the answers to come. You're not interrogating life for closure. You're not bartering with the universe for guarantees. You're just here. And that feels like a miracle. This is what remains when certainty is surrendered. Not chaos, not collapse, but a quiet clarity. Because what you were really craving wasn't knowing, it was peace. And now you understand, knowing isn't the gateway to peace. It's often the obstacle. There's a part of you that never trusted silence. It always felt like a threat, a void, a gap that needed to be filled with words, logic, proof, conclusions. But silence was never your enemy. It was the womb, the place before all knowing, the place where you learn to listen again. Not to facts, but to presence. Not to intellect, but to intuition. The quiet voice beneath all the noise. That voice wasn't trying to explain life. It was showing you how to feel it. The truth is, you were never meant to hold everything together. That was never your job. Your job was only to be here, to live, to see, to sense, to choose, and to grow. Certainty promised safety, but presence gave you aliveness. And slowly, this became enough. Not because you solved all your questions, but because you finally respected them. You stopped asking life to behave. You stopped asking the future to obey. You stopped asking your past to apologize. And in that surrender, the war ended. You didn't win clarity. You released the demand for it. So now, when confusion visits, you don't panic. You welcome it. You sit with it like an old friend who speaks in riddles. And even when you don't understand what it's saying, you trust that its presence is meaningful. Because that's what maturity is. Not perfect knowledge, but deep trust in the unknown. Sometimes you still ache to know, to control, to label and resolve. But something in you resists the urge to reach. You place a hand on your own chest instead. You breathe. You watch the mind's hunger for certainty rise, and then you watch it fall away. You realize you've survived countless moments without knowing. You've thrived in places you didn't understand. You've loved people you couldn't explain. You've rebuilt yourself from pieces you never fully recognized. And now, you don't need answers to move forward. You just need alignment. And alignment doesn't come from force. It comes from quiet. From the willingness to stop demanding explanations and start listening to life. The stillness that remains is not the stillness of nothing. It's the stillness of integration. All that you felt, feared, lost, chased, and avoided, all of it becomes part of you now. And it doesn't scream anymore. It doesn't beg to be solved. It simply sits beside you, like a loyal shadow, a reminder that you don't need to outthink the dark. You only need to walk through it. And you are. You look out the window. There is no sudden revelation, no cosmic sign, no grand prophecy. Just a world that keeps turning, a breeze that keeps whispering, and a heart that's finally quiet enough to hear it. If this voice spoke to something deep inside you, don't rush past it. Give it space. Let it echo. And if this journey meant something to you, subscribe, reflect, and return when the noise gets too loud. Because sometimes all we truly need is to remember how to listen again.